Muy buenos días a todas.
Good
Buenas tardes.
day, everyone. Actually, good afternoon, everyone. So, it is a pleasure to be here today with all of you. Welcome to this first round of consultation in our project Restoring Hope in Ecuador. My name is Cassandra Llosa. I work as an analyst for stakeholder engagement, key stakeholder involvement in our program at UNDP New York. However, I'm based in Peru, so Latin American, just as you. And we also are playing soccer today. So hopefully all of the participants will remain here in spite of our program. Our match at 4 p.m. Ecuador time. And I'm glad to introduce Maria Veronica Cordova, who's also holds a master's degree in the environment and water resources. She's also a national consultant supporting the UNDP office here in country. And Maria Veronica, please take the opportunity if you wanted to introduce and greet participants. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with all of you here supporting this process as a national consultant. If you have any doubts whatsoever with regards to the project that we will be introducing today, please feel free to contact us, either myself or my colleague Cassandra. We're already, yes, I see that you're wearing your t-shirt. So all the best, Ecuador. For the match and also for this workshop to restore hope in Ecuador. So before we start our session, although we're all experts with the Zoom tool and all of the digital platforms, I would like to highlight some logistical aspects. We will have simultaneous interpretation into English and Spanish since some of our speakers today do not speak Spanish. I would like to thank interpreters Carmelo Velázquez and Flor Teano for joining us today. So in order for you to enable the interpretation, you will see in the lower end of the Zoom toolbar, there's a globe icon. It will, in my case, it's interpretación in Spanish, but you will see that interpretation. Please click there and display the two languages and select the language of preference. I'm going to remain in Spanish in order to avoid any technical issues, but please let me know, those of you who are, for example, Marion, who's listening to us in English, please let me know and confirm, maybe show a thumbs up to confirm interpretation is working properly in order to continue. Thank you so much. I would also like to recommend all participants and all of our speakers to try to pause when speaking and slowly, as I'm actually trying to do right now, for us to further support the work of interpreters and also to um, make sure our communication flows as smoothly as possible. If you have any issues with the platform, please take down some notes and also take note of Marion's email address. If you have any or encounter any type of inconvenience, please, you can either DM her or also contact her at her email address so that we may not divert our attention from what will be covered today in this session. Please make sure you mute your microphones throughout the session so that we do not interfere with the original audio. And however, when we have the Q&A session, you will, of course, be able to send some sort of reaction, raise your hands, or also turn on your cameras and visually make a hands up to request your turn. I will be, of course, giving you the possibility for those of you who may want to do so to open and speak up, open your microphones and speak up. Lastly, we will have a drive folder where we will be sharing all of the recordings, that is today's session, presentations, and other resources that may be used throughout the session. So we are quite diverse. There's a total of 32 attendees. So that is indeed a pleasure to see. There's lots of familiar faces. This is a quite large group in Ecuador. Maybe we won't be able to introduce ourselves one by one, but I will ask um, because you have the option when you have the participant list to rename yourselves. So in that case, you can click on more and rename yourselves and also write the institution you're a part of. I will do that right now, Cassandra Llosa, and I'm going to add UNDP. So that's the way we should be renaming ourselves so that you can also introduce yourselves in the group chat so that we know who we are in this session and also enrich our dialogue. For example, we see people joining from the GSI. Thank you so much from the university as well, from the FNAC. Thank you so much for that. So before we delve directly into our agenda for today's session, um, we're going to make as if we were in the actual in-person room, and we're going to have a group picture right now. We're going to take this. So please, if you would turn on your cameras right now so that we can have this group picture. Maria Veronica, I think, will be taking the picture. Please help me and let me know when it's ready so that we can continue. Very well. So we're going to take the first picture. Hold on 1 second. We have several attendees, so that is several screens. Second picture. And give me your best smile. Thank you. Already, yeah. We should be smiling. There's lots of pictures taken. Very well. So thank you so much for that. So in order to officially kick off with our consultation workshop, I'm going to give the floor to Andrea Vivar. She's a technical officer for the environment and energy at the UNDP office in Peru. Uh, Thank you so much for being here. Andrea, take it away.
Muchas gracias, Cassandra, por la introducción.
Thank you so much for your kind introduction, Cassandra. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to greet you all. So from our UNDP program, it is indeed a pleasure to be with all of you today in this first workshop of the project Restoring Hope in Ecuador. I would like to extend my thanks to all of the Ministry of the Environment, Water and Ecological Transition, and to all of you representatives of your different sectors, public, private sectors, and civil society sector as well. 2030 Agenda has a transforming viewpoint towards social sustainability, environmental and economic sustainability of all countries, and Ecuador has ratified its commitment to achieve these goals through inclusive processes, cross-cutting, and multi-level processes. So taking into account that Ecuador is a diverse country with diverse and unique landscape, from the local communities to national scales, it is therefore necessary to implement processes, programs, and projects that may further sustain ecosystems and environmental services that they provide. Although it is true, on the one hand, we benefit from all of this nature towards socioeconomic development, but at present, this leads to loss of ecological integrity and well-being for the populations that inhabit those areas and are vulnerable. In spite of these negative tangible effects, degradation of ecosystem continues, and even in some areas, we see this exacerbated in an accelerated fashion. Therefore, we are today gathered in order to kick off this project that seeks solutions for all degradation processes in ecosystems, climate change, desertification, and degradation of soil. So what is a common and shared solution? The restoration of landscape across all different scales, from the local to global levels. On a global level, all biodiversity, climate change, and fight against desertification efforts, as well as the Paris Agreement and the Global Framework on Biodiversity, acknowledge the importance of promoting efforts of restoration. And additionally, most of the countries have actually committed to certain goals with regards to restoration. That is neutrality with regards to degradation of soils, national strategies on biodiversity, and NDCs. Within this framework, the UNDP, alongside the Biological Diversity Convention, in coordination with the Ministry of the Environment, Water, and Ecological Transition, joined this global initiative to restore hope in Ecuador and contribute to the development and implementation of an effective restoration. As it has been put forth in the different national policies, it is stipulated in our constitution, the organic code of the environment, the national strategy for biodiversity, and other global commitments, such as the 2030 agenda. Through the work that we will be developing together, we hope to collaborate in the process of identifying priority areas for restoration based on policy priorities for restoring Ecuador and with a broad mapping analysis assessment with the best GIS information on biodiversity, climate change, and degradation on a national and global levels. We are confident that methodologies to be applied and technical support may serve in turn for Ecuador in the process may reach restoration of its landscapes, and in turn strengthen technical capacities, creating spaces for dialogue, discussion, and construction of key stakeholders towards that goal. And lastly, I'd like to thank you all for your engagement and commitment throughout the development of this project and throughout all of the consultation rounds. I wish you all the best, and hopefully this meeting will be enriching and useful in order to build a more sustainable Ecuador. Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrea, for your intervention and also for your contribution and collaboration with the project. We also extend our gratitude to all of the team in Ecuador who's following up this project closely. It is also a pleasure to greet Marilene Schultz, who's the Director for International Cooperation for the Ministry of the Environment, Water, and Ecological Transition in Ecuador, who will be giving us some welcoming remarks. Over to you, Marilene. It is a pleasure to greet you all on this occasion, to be joining you in this opportunity and say that from our Ministry of the Environment, Water, and Ecological Transition, and especially from the Division of International Cooperation, we're very pleased to be able to participate and engage and continue with the development of such an important project, Restoring Hope, with the support of Peru and of course, UNDP, sorry, and of course with all of the other stakeholders. We will be closely following along with our technical team, all of the meetings, but I would just wish you all the best and say that from international cooperation, we will be providing all of the necessary support. So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much, Maria Irene, and all of the team at the Ministry of the Environment, Water and Ecological Transition in Ecuador, who have been providing and will be providing their support in order to really size all of the project across the country. So in anticipation, we thank you for all of the feedback and accompaniment that you will be providing in order to enhance this project and product that we will be working on that will derive in this dossier termed Restoring Hope in Ecuador. So again, I reiterate, I'm very pleased to be here with you. This is a first workshop that we are carrying out within this project in Ecuador. One of the first ones that we are also taking to other countries as a pilot project. And that is a continuity. Can we have the slides up, please? That's a continuity of the project Mapping Nature for People and the Planet in Ecuador. This project was implemented back in 2021 and 2022. Many of you were part of this, have met me, have met all of the global team who is now online. Maria Veronica was also a national consultant for this ELSA project in Ecuador. The project sought to identify the essential livelihood areas, that is the acronyms ELSA, where these are certain recommendations where they say that that nature should be managed, protected, or restored in order to help Ecuador reach national goals in terms of biodiversity, climate change, and sustainable development. So you can see in this ELSA map in Ecuador what the outcomes were. This was the first map of 2022, quite recent. Uh, and we've been implementing this project in a total of 13 countries quite successfully. My colleague Enrique Paniagua, expert in policies of the World Program for Development at the UNDP, will be explaining this in depth in a few minutes. This particular workshop and this project in particular is a natural continuum of this ELSA project, and we've actually termed it ELSA Plus in our portfolio based on the excellent work conducted in Ecuador. Again, one of the 13 pilot countries in this project. So I would like to go through the goals for this specific workshop and actually the goals for the project at large. And to this end, my colleague Maria Veronica will be sharing in the chat box. Oh, I see she's already shared the last version of our agenda. You got this in the invites that you got through your emails, and we can see that in general terms, the goals are four. That is identifying and prioritizing the spheres in which the political responsible parties may adopt measures for restoration to meet the national commitments in terms of biodiversity and soil degradation, review strategic priorities for the country in terms of restoration. Thirdly, to determine the global and national data to carry out this analysis. And lastly, apply systematic planning methods for conservation. That is all of this science behind ELSA, who most of you, if you've participated in this, may be already familiar with this, and we will be delving into this with our scientific advisor to look and to pour into a project this scientific perspective and rigor. Since this workshop is online, we've also aimed at implementing this in one session. I know it is sometimes difficult to connect so many hours, but I'm going to ask of you the commitment so as not to block our agenda again. So the project has two important rounds of consultations. The first one is the one that we are carrying out today, where we will be focusing on the vision of this project, understanding why this is important in a given specific context for Ecuador. And we will also delve into the core of our session, and that is to submit and share with you the first draft of the dossier, Restoring Hope for Ecuador. It has been shared with all of you last week at the call and invitation, and we've already received certain feedback. Thank you for that. And we will later on have this feedback session to gather your contributions, both in terms of methodology and also with regards to the data that we are using to conduct the analysis. As for the second part, that is the second round of consultations, that will be carried out in the next month or next weeks, hopefully. We will be letting you know ahead of time, and we will be looking and reviewing this with an updated version as of the feedback that we are getting today, that we will be getting today. But of course, you will be informed of this in advance. And as I said, you will be getting all of the information on the different presentations, recordings, and other resources in a Drive folder. And my colleague, Maria Veronica, is copying and pasting this in the chat box once again, for those of you who may not have joined the session in time. And now focusing on today's workshop, we will be concentrating, first of all, on the vision for Ecuador. and also on understanding how the project Restoring Hope may contribute so that Ecuador further meets its priorities in terms of restoration. In order to do this, we will be listening to the presentation by Enrique Paniagua, my colleague from the UNDP. Uh, and later on, we will have a presentation from Maria Veronica Cordova. She's a national consultant providing support to UNDP Ecuador. She's already greeted us as a group. And we will see how this project uh, will be contributing to Ecuador's priorities through different types of activities and actions. And later on, we will have a series of presentations. We will also review the feedback that you may be providing in order to pour this dossier for restoring hope in Ecuador. These different feedbacks that we may get from your end will be very valuable so that the global team may work on a second version of the dossier that we will be sharing with you at this second round of consultation in the short run. So before we move on to the presentation, and I think that I'm extending, I would like to thank all of the institutions that make this project in Ecuador possible. Firstly, the office of the UNDP Ecuador, who's worked very closely with us, both on the pre-launching phases, vision of the project, and the design and development of this workshop. We also would like to thank the Ministry of the Environment, Water, and Ecological Transition that has also helped in this regard, and the Secretariat on the Convention on Biological Diversity funding this project in turn. So without further ado, we're now going to delve straight into our discussion with regards to the vision of this project, Restoring Hope in Ecuador, and see how this approach may provide support so that the country may meet its commitments in terms of restoration in the country. With that, I'm going to give the floor to my colleague Enrique Paniagua. He's a senior expert in the World Conservation Program for Development, that is the UNDP. And at the end, we will have a Q&A session. Of course, if you have any question throughout the presentation, please feel free to drop the question in the chat box, and I will be taking other questions. Over to you, Enrique.
Thank you, Cassandra. I would like to thank you for being with us here today. Effectively, I'm going to give you an overview on how are we developing this project. And the name, Restoring Hope, derives from this project of Maps of Hope, of the ELSA maps that Cassandra was mentioning previously. It is a project that we develop in Ecuador and in other countries as well. And we have concrete results in those countries and in Ecuador as well. And how did we arrive to this particular moment in the project? Well, can we go to the next slide, please? We are seeing how between 20 and 40% of soils are degraded. And I'm talking about dry soils, cultivated soils, forests in general, between 20 and 40% of degradation level. 38% of Amazonian forests are suffering some kind of degradation. 75% of coral reefs in the Atlantic are threatened. And we see that 1 million of fishes are overexploited. We have gone beyond the planetary limits, and out of 1 million people depend on agricultural activities and fishing for survival, and more than half of the world GDP depends on capital natural capital. So we are destroying the nature, and also we have thousands and millions of people depending on nature. And the world economy depends on nature as well. And that is why we need to decide on what path to follow. We can see to the left a graphic showing the report that was published by the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, and we see how the function of ecosystems have been affected, a historical change that has become more dramatic as the last decades have gone by. And we continue to see that the attitude is business as usual. We continue doing the same. We continue destroying systematically nature, and therefore the ecological functions and the conditions of Earth. And either we make a decision to prevent these significant losses, or we will continue to see this trend. And we have other opportunities, of course, that may lead us to change the path and enter a path of restoration of nature, and from that point improve the condition of the Earth and towards a better scenario and getting closer to the original scenario. And if we add the protection of nature, we'll be able to reach the optimal conditions of Earth and the ecosystems. And there are no reasons for us not to assume or move towards these scenarios, because each dollar that is invested to restore degraded soils brings benefit. An economy of regenerative restoration produces annual yields between 125 and 140 billion dollars, 5 times the world GDP of last year. So we're talking about growth of the economies if we follow this logic of restoration. And we also would like to mention two things that have taken place that are positive and they are helping us to move towards the aforementioned scenarios. The Decade for Restoration, a program that is launched by the United Nations between 2021 and 2030. This is an appeal that has been launched by the United Nations following this logic of restoration. And in 2021, already 115 countries have committed to restore 1 billion hectares. So just for us to have an idea, this is a surface larger than the United States and China, a large amount of soil to be restored. So we're moving towards more positive scenarios. Next slide, please. So that is the way we have reached this project that we are developing within the framework on the Convention of Biological Diversity, or CBD. And what we want to do is to collaborate in the implementation of the goal number 2 of the World Framework on Biological Diversity, that is making an emphasis on restoration. And the purpose of this project is to help the countries to optimize their restoration goals through public policies, among other mechanisms. We are working also with the Convention to Combat Desertification, and there are some pillars that we are using to develop the analysis. One of them is the global framework of biological diversity, as I said before, and the strategic goal 1 of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, that also emphasizes on restoration, and the national restoration policies. in the case of Ecuador, the National Plan for Restoration. Next slide, please. And we are developing this project in 5 countries. These are the pilot countries. And then we would like to extend this to other countries and maybe deepen the work that we started in the pioneer countries. And the countries are Chile, Ecuador, South Africa, Kazakhstan, and Colombia. As you can see, there is a wide variety of ecosystems here represented. As you can see. Next slide, please. So, as I was saying, and as Cassandra said at the beginning, we are working on this mapping of essential areas to support life. This project is comprised by 5 stages. One of them is to create a national vision of the country through the identification of political priorities, then to identify opportunities, then the co-creation of these ELSA maps with the help of national experts, and also cross-cutting approach of results. And we have done this in Ecuador, and the resulting map is the one that we can see here. In the case of Ecuador, here we can see how through a model that uses the strategic planning for conservation, and we were able to identify areas that required protection for restoration and sustainable development in Ecuador. And what we want to do now is to iterate this methodology specifically related to restoration and deepen this initiative, insert more data sets, more data reading mechanisms, and deepen the analysis level in order to make relevant decisions at the level of public policy and also translate this into concrete projects. Please, next slide. I just wanted to thank you. Thank you for your participation, for being here. Please stay with us, working hard up to obtaining results, because results are great and it's good also to count on your feedback. Thank you. Thank you, Enrique, for your great presentation. If you have any questions so far or any comment or reaction, you can raise your hand virtually or leave your comment or question in the chat. It seems there is a question in the chat. Have you considered see areas in the ELSA mapping? We're going to precisely work the analysis level. I'm going to ask your question when we will have the scientific team making their presentation. Let me see if there is any other question. Byron is asking, is it possible to have access to a technical report on the mapping obtained in Galapagos? And Maria Alejandra is taking note of these questions to see if access is possible to the mapping obtained in Galapagos. Galapagos has not been included in the analysis. If we can check that in the data layers. I'm taking notes of these questions, both made by Fabian and Byron. Any other question concerning the presentation of Enrique? It seems known. So now we're going to move on to the presentation of Maria Verónica Córdoba, who's the national expert that is supporting the UNDP in Ecuador with this project. She's going to share a perspective, show us how this project is contributing to the restoration goals in Ecuador. Maria Verónica, the floor is yours. Thank you, Cassandra, and thank you, Enrique, for making such a good summary in order to start speaking about this that we are discussing today, this first workshop to present the dossier on the Restoring Hope project in Ecuador. We wanted to show how this process and this project that is undertaken globally with other countries is also being implemented in Ecuador, and why is it being implemented? How this project with its byproducts is going to contribute with the agendas already set by Ecuador and the progress that Ecuador has attained so far. But let's explore first why Ecuador is so important to the implementation of this pilot project. Some of you may have this information already at your disposal. But however, it's good to remind you that Ecuador is a country full of diversity and with abundance of natural resources. We all depend on these natural resources, and quite often these resources are part of the livelihood for communities. And with the loss of diversity, we see an impact, and these increases due to the atropic activities and the other phenomena that take place. Ecuador has recognized biodiversity as a strategic resource, and highlighted the natural resources that need to be preserved to guarantee the well-being of the environment in our country. Thank you for the question that was posted. Sometimes the marine coastal areas are excluded or neglected or forgotten, but later on we will precisely address this. What we can see here is that currently Ecuador has declared 76 protected areas. Up to this date, the Ministry of Environment, Water and Ecological Transition in Ecuador is in the process of creating protected areas and be effectively managed. Out of these 76 protected areas, 19 of them are national park, which is the highest category in terms of protection in our country, which shows that from the institutional side and on the private sector, there is a commitment for the preservation of these spaces that are important to keep the ecological processes under good conditions. Last year, the La Hermandad Marine Reserve was created, which is a very important area for the country. It's a marine area for the protection of marine species and some species that are present in Ecuador part of the year. Also, the protection of water resources, places where waters have been declared of public interest and that provide supply for human consumption, and also are used to guarantee food sovereignty. And these are key concepts that need to be considered in Ecuador, not only for the protection of this area, but also for the implementation of sectorial plans in the territories. So there are several levels, not only we take into account the efforts of central governments, but also sectorial governments. There is the protection also of forests that are equivalent to 9% of the continental land territory of Ecuador. Another important thing to remind you is that the Putumayo River are a very important areas for the protection of the tributaries in Ecuador, and this is a work that has been conducted with the support of other countries as well. Another important piece of data taking into account the marine area is the La Plata Island, part of with a large presence of giant fishes in Ecuador, and we have other important species there in this territory, the manta rays, and the different species that are present in regions such as Galapagos Island. We have the Andean beer, among other emblematic species, the whales, green turtles, and we have an abundance of species that need to be protected. And more recently, the Ministry of Environment declared that the Amazonic Biocorridor is about to be created, which is a very important landmark for Ecuador as a significant commitment in terms of protection. For all the aforementioned reasons, Ecuador was one of the main countries for the implementation of this pilot program for this mapping within this project of mapping of nature. So the methodology what took into account the participation of several stakeholders for the protection of areas. Please go to the next slide. This took place between 2021 and 2022.
And as of the success that this project had, we started having these conversations among the different countries and this global initiative by the UNDP in order to be part of this Restoring Hope project. In 2023, the ministry adopts the possibility of joining the project, and as is this as this is actually a comprehensive project, the technical dependencies of the International Cooperation Division, the different secretariats, such as climate change, etc., and the Cooperation Division commit to supporting the implementation of the project. So not all is sunny skies when it comes to conservation. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. Unfortunately, in Ecuador, we've seen a very tough process of degradation on a continental level, and you can see this since 1990 to date. And basically, the available results as of the gross deforestation process, the last period was 2018, 2020. You can see that deforested area on an average, on an annual average of percentage from 91,000 hectares is comparable to 2.5 times the surface of the city of Quito deforested on a yearly basis. So we really need to work hard in order to meet the goals in terms of restoration of landscape. Additionally, there has been a loss of regulation and availability of water resources, an increase also in greenhouse gas emissions on a national level. So this in turn increases the loss of biodiversity, triggering vulnerability of inhabitants, especially rural areas, impacting the livelihoods. Aside of the social impact of the individuals who have historically benefited of the exploitation of forests, because we're not talking about only the degradation of biodiversity, but rather that biodiversity has exacerbated the cultural differences. There's a great attachment, an ancestral attachment that is part of certain communities. And of course, it's not just a degradation then of biodiversity. We see that there's a close correlation of biodiversity and society. Therefore, it is key to understand all processes of restoration and then sow the seeds of restoring the hope. That's why it's so important to implement this project so as not to miss out and lose these ancestral wisdom. Given or as certain inhabitants are displaced and forced to migrate to other areas. And the idea then is to the state, alongside the key stakeholders, is for them to implement these initiatives that will counteract all of the negative aspects. With regards to global and national commitments, many of you may know on a global level, there has been the ratification of several conventions. These are the agendas that bring us together also to be able to implement the project. We have the constitution, then the Convention on Biological Diversity, Framework Convention from UN on climate change, and also the Convention on the fight against desertification and drought. This was, of course, a very ambitious project. There is a Declaration of the Rights of Nature in the Constitution of the Republic of 2008 as a key priority for our country. And since the kickoff of this new project, we want to include biodiversity in planning in a cross-cutting way and also at the different governmental levels. Aside of this, we see a reference made in the 2008 Constitution, a different concepts towards restoration. For example, Article 70, nature has a right to restoration, and Article 71, there's a right to the full respect of its existence, management, and sustainability of nature. That is, in a way, paving the way for these actions, not just for the state, but also for all stakeholders involved in processes of restoration, alongside other norms that are derived from this constitutional mandate, such as the Organic Code of the Environment, the National Strategy on Biodiversity, which is quite ambitious and poses these interesting questions with regards to the relationship of these dreams we have with regards to conservation, closely tied to political agendas and policies in the country. Later on, we will see and go through the different specific metrics and policies that have been used in order to develop the document. Among these stand the National Plan for Forest Restoration and the National Project for Restoring Landscape. And then we have national strategies on climate change, national plan on climate change adaptation, the national plan on adaptation. This is a very important system and method that has been developed, the different national and communication flows, and the national plan on water resources. So with this slide, what I wanted to share with you is that there are several initiatives in place, and the Ministry of the Environment has exerted an effort in order to make agendas converge with regards to the restoration of biodiversity, climate change, and desertification. We can also see that we have quite a lot of information available at the Geographical and Statistical Atlas for the environment and water resources in Ecuador, and through the system of different climate change, the SPRACC tool. This is available with very useful information. And as we can see, the aspect of implementing data based on decisions are key. So hopefully all of this will be contributing to data consolidation on a national and global sphere in order to really have these maps for restoration. The idea is to tie all of this and make it as robust and sound as possible in order to take more informed decisions and also to develop policies that may aid in these efforts. Thank you so much, Maria Veronica, for such a thorough presentation. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to drop that in the chat box or also raise your hands through on a reaction or emoji. And as I said, all comments or questions will be tended to in the presentation of the exam through the data use, methodology used to this purpose. Apparently, there's no question yet. So what we will do is to have a kind of warmer activity or break the ice activity. So what we will do is to have a link to Jamboard. This is the online way of posting notes. This is what we would do in an in-person session where we will be able to place our expectations looking into this workshop. So if you can, please, Maria Veronica, copy and paste the link in the chat box so that participants can join the Jamboard tool. So you will have access to what you see on the screen. If you click on that link, Monica, now you're sharing the screen. Please could you please click on the posted note so that we can see how on the left side toolbar for this Jamboard you can have or can enable the notepad for you to write a sticky note. And if we were in an in-person session, we would give away or around the post-it notes so that you may stick this on the board. I'm not sure what you call this, Maria Veronica, in Ecuador, but that is what would most likely what it would happen. And what about the board? Yeah, we call it board also. Because in Colombia, we call that the flip chart, for example. So we see this. Okay, so see how we can articulate areas and goals as of the current tools used with the Restoration National Program. I assume the DNRP, the PNRP, the National Plan of Landscape Restoration. Yes. Then we have practical applications or implementation of geospatial products. Another expectation that okay, we need to have a clear idea of governance uh, to be taken into account for this initiative at PNUD. That is also an expectation, what you want to do, that is understand with regards to governance. Then we have another expectation. What will be the process in order to set forth the goals, the conservation and restoration goals on a national level? We will be looking at this. My colleague Enrique Paniagua will be explaining this with regards to the analysis of public policies that we will see have been included in order to help inform the goals and set forth the goals so as to identify the areas to restore in Ecuador. That is a major progress made. Maria Veronica has also given us some heads up with regards to the governance of this project that falls on the articulation work with the Ministry of the Environment, seeking those collaborative efforts for us to consult with the highest number of stakeholders, key stakeholders related to this subject matter in the country. So practical exercises or tangible exercises for the, I'm sorry, but it's erased. We also see the inclusion of some marine and coastal region areas in the exercise of priority setting. We also are asked if you are expecting to quantify ecosystemic services that may be key in order to restore. Maybe we can take this question also to Lee for the data section, because there is a participant who's interested in learning about that. That is, if you are expecting to quantify ecosystemic services that may be key to restore. Opportunities for synergy among different projects and programs in the sphere of restoration, how to course then create certain conditions and convergence, alignment also with the Convention on Biodiversity Framework and with the NSBAP. The idea would be not to duplicate, to eliminate all sort of potential duplication or overlapping. And of course, again, in the exercise for priority setting, steps to among the different stakeholders. This is what we will be doing today and in the upcoming sessions. Understand the role of the Amazon rainforest in the project, identifying the areas in the Amazon. It is necessary there to understand the area with regards to restoration. Please make sure you do not write on top of the other person's posted, because otherwise it would be replaced or superseded. So make sure you create a new post-it. Please let us know if you're having any trouble with this tool, the Jamboard, and the technical team may, of course, create this post-it notes. So with that, we have concluded this exercise. The Jamboard will remain open so that you may continue dropping your expectations here so that the scientific team or the technical team that is closely reading all of these so that these presentation sessions and upcoming feedback sessions may be really focusing and targeting your expectations so that we can cast away any potential doubt. Thank you so much for actively engaging in this exercise. And now we will delve into the presentation of this first draft of Ecuador's dossier, that is Restoring Hope for Ecuador. In this session, we will be looking or want to introduce the first version of the restoration dossier that our team generated last week. But before this, I would like to launch a very brief survey. I'm not sure if it's ready. It'll show up on the Zoom screen where you will let us know if you've had any time to go through the dossier so that we can know where we stand and we know where we depart so that we can carry out this analysis. So there should be around 30 answers for us to have an idea of where we are standing. I see that 6 colleagues have been able to review this. Uh, if you haven't had time, please let us know. There's no problem. But as of this, we will be able to have an overview about the tools also to be able to read this. So if you haven't been able to go through it, no problems. Don't worry. This will also be useful in regards to the reverse exercise that you may do. We will be sharing the dossier with you, and you will have, of course, more time to provide your feedback. From here, we'll give you 1 week for you to do that, so we can have an end version ready before we meet again. So with that, we have a total of interesting answers so as to have an idea or kind of rounded up idea. I think it's almost half of the participants, a little bit less than half the participants who have been able to go through it, the dossier. So thank you so much for answering our survey. So with that, I would just like to mention that this dossier has been the result of a joint work, both on the UNDP side and also from the Secretariat on the Convention on Biological Diversity, which are seeking to test this synergy based approach, where we also seek to gather experiences with regards to prioritization of areas in the territory to provide restoration as of an intergovernmental exercise in the light of international commitments, with a focus on national commitments from the different countries that my colleagues have already mentioned. We are conducting this pilot project. So this particular dossier seeks to contribute in the country for each country to use the goals and targets for restoration in order to identify these areas in the territory where, through different conventions on biodiversity, climate change, and degradation of soils, they may be able to prioritize areas of restoration and may give way to dialogue, as has been signaled in the expectations, in order to conduct collaborative work among the different sectors in light of these 3 conventions that we have mentioned, and my colleague Enrique Paniagua also reiterated. Also, in light of the conversation with different stakeholders related to this shared work on restoration on a national level. And what we will do now is go through a first review of this overall review of the dossier, we will look at the political analysis that has been carried out, the mapping section, the degradation areas, possibilities of restoration. We will also take a very brief break, and after the break, we will look in detail into the feedback, which, as Enrique said, is the heart of the matter as well. So we will be looking for your engagement. So first of all, we're going to start with a presentation from my colleague, Enrique Paniagua, expert on policies for the global program for conservation at the UNDP office. So he will be sharing with us all of the public policies that have been assessed in this and poured in this dossier for restoration ecosystems in Ecuador. So take it away, Enrique.
Yes, effectively. I wanted to give you an initial background before entering the consultation as such on how this dossier is structured and what did we do in the field of the analysis of public policy. The dossier has been structured in two blocks. One of them is the summary of the restoration of ecosystems in Ecuador. We have there a presentation of what is the governance of the restoration of ecosystems in Ecuador, what are the challenges in the countries, and what are the priorities set in terms of public policy. We do this last part because we want to know what is the necessary geospatial information in order to make these public policies possible. And in the second block, is the second block of the mapping for the restoration of ecosystems. And there we're going to show the analysis we have performed with regards to the current status of the ecosystems, the potential for restoration opportunities, potential benefits, climate risks and restoration. And we are going to have a deep explanation by our scientific specialists and our colleague from the scientific team, and speaking about each one of the layers we have used. With regards to public policy, next slide, please. We have reviewed the following 10 public policies. The first, the National Plan for Forest Restoration, the action red plan, the first national contribution determined, up to the comprehensive plan for the Amazonia. What we did was to identify the goals that the country has set through these policies. Please, next slide. And we have a series of goals or objectives identified that you can see in the dossier we already shared. I just wanted to highlight some of the most important elements from the spatial point of view. In the dossier, you will find the rest. And we're going also to offer during the second presentation of this dossier, we're going to share information on how these goals are at the level of implementation and resources. What a screenshot of the current status or state of affairs. We can see the National Plan of Restoration. Up to December of 2021, 30,000 hectares in process of restoration will be added. For 2021, there is already an accumulated restoration surface that has increased up to 300,000 hectares. That's part of the national strategy of biodiversity that has undergone an updating process. Also, for 2021, the deforestation rate had been reduced in at least 5% if compared to the baseline year. And for 2025, the idea is to reach 9 square meters per person of urban green space and go beyond the 2035 standard. So we're not going to enter in details about the public policies because, as I said before, we want to focus more on the geospatial aspects. We want to check with you the methodology and the information layers we have used. And if you have any comments on the public policies that we have reviewed, please let us know. Write a comment. For example, if we omitted an important public policy that should be taken into account, please specify which one in the chat. If you can share PDF documents, they are also welcome, and also important goals, things that you deem important that need to be considered. And we thank you for your feedback, your comments and questions. Please, Cass, let's go to the next block. Thank you, Enrique. And as you can see in the chat, there is a comment shared by Pablo that is very important. That the idea is precisely take these results as priorities or provide suggestions to this review of prioritization. This exercise of prioritization is very important, Enrique, if we can clarify this both for Pablo and the rest of the participants. What we want is that participants give us their vision from the point of view of institutional experts with regards to the results we are obtaining in the mapping process we are undertaking. Because we want that MATE or other institutions at the national level may use these results for the implementation of public policies and for the implementation of projects. The idea is that they take these results and say, well, these are the most important areas for restoration. Let's focus on doing this and that, because we are seeing that in this analysis, the following data were included with regards to specific lands, data about organic carbon. So the idea is that the analysis we are performing at this moment might be useful for effective decision making. That is why we want to have this dossier available as an input. Thank you, Enrique. That's very clear. And as we move on, the results of this exercise are going to help us to contribute and to articulate efforts with the Ministry of Environment and in general in Ecuador for setting priorities in terms of restoration. So now we have the presentation of Oscar Benter, who is going to give you an explanation about the logic of science that has been used for the Restoring Hope project in Ecuador. Oscar, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Cassandra, for the introduction. And thank you all for attending this session. We're already receiving excellent feedback from you through the Jamboard that was run recently. We're now going to be shifting to hear from the science team. There'll be 3 of us presenting different elements to give you an overview of the draft work we've undertaken to map restoration priorities within Ecuador. This is in every way draft work, and we've shared an initial dossier that outlines in some detail this work. But really the point of this consultation is to receive your feedback such that we can refine the work and better reflect national priorities and national data as we identify the restoration priorities. So after a series of presentations, we're going to have a large session at the end to try to harness that feedback. But at any point, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to put them into the chat or wait till the end of an individual presentation and we can have discussion then. So this first presentation is really to, as Cassandra said, give you an overview of the methodology that we were using to map restoration priorities within the dossier. Monica, are you able to screen share?
Sí, ahorita vamos a volver a compartir la
Yes,
pantalla.
we're going to start sharing the screen in a moment. Oscar, Maria Victoria is going to start sharing the screen now. Thank you. We had a connection problem. Sorry for the interruption. We'll be sharing the screen in a moment.
Ahí lo podemos poner en pantalla completa.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. And are you able to
Perfecto,
advance?
Oscar, creo que podemos continuar.
Could you advance one slide, please? Thank you. So the structure of this presentation, I'm going to give you kind of the overall logic for the methodology that outlines or underlies the geospatial analyses, and then a bit of an overview of some of the methodology and data that we're using within the restoration dossier, and then we'll have an opportunity for your feedback. Next slide, please. So I just want to reiterate that the purpose of this work is to support policies and activities under the Target 2 of the Kunming Global Biodiversity Framework, which is to ensure that by 2030, at least 30% of degraded areas are under effective restoration. I do also want to highlight in the right panel of this presentation, you can see the text in white, and that is that the effective restoration should enhance biodiversity, ecosystem functions and services, ecological integrity, and connectivity. These are what we consider the qualitative estimates of this restoration target, and it speaks directly to the desired outcomes of restorations, really the reason why restoration benefits society and ecosystems. So a lot of the geospatial work that we're undertaking is to map these benefits of restoration and how they can be maximized through any restoration activities. Next slide, please. So our overall methodology was designed to answer a series of broad questions that are important for thinking about restoration at a national level. The first question was quite simply, what areas within Ecuador are currently degraded? This is to establish kind of a baseline of the state of natural and degraded ecosystems as a way to start to think about prioritizing restoration actions. Our next question was to ask, well, what are the opportunities as well as the constraints in undertaking ecosystem restoration? Then what are some of the trade-offs? Restoration has very many positive economic, social, and environmental benefits, but it also has some costs, some trade-offs. So some of our questions are, how can we harness geospatial data to explore and minimize those trade-offs? And then finally, the place that we wanted to end up was an answer to the question of, where are the 30% of degraded terrestrial ecosystems that are priorities for effective restoration? This is speaking then to trying to use geospatial data to directly inform that restoration target. Next slide, please. So our methodology can be broken down into 6 steps that each one builds off the previous. The first step is really a baseline analysis of the potential habitat distributions within Ecuador. What is the natural state of ecosystems is what we're asking here. The second step is to evaluate opportunities for the restoration of ecosystems. This is to understand really where are degraded ecosystems. The next step, step 3, is really where the bulk of our geospatial work lies, and that's to try to map the potential benefits of restoration. biological benefits, climate benefits, and ecosystem service and human well-being benefits. Now, step 4 and 5 are steps to evaluate some of the trade-offs of restoration. This is the trade-offs in terms of the costs of restoration, as well as some of the climate risks or resilience of restoration activities. Now, I'll just point out in the draft dossier, we haven't undertaken the work yet for steps 4 and 5 to evaluate these trade-offs. But in this presentation, I'm going to highlight some of our initial thinking for how to use geospatial data to evaluate these trade-offs and ask for your guidance for how to proceed. And then we hope that those steps will be part of the final restoration dossier that we work towards. Step 6, the last step, is really where we're trying to end up, and that is a map that identifies restoration priorities across Ecuador. Next slide, please. So that first step of mapping potential habitat distributions across the country, you can see our preliminary result in the map on the right. The purpose of this step is to set the context for the natural state of ecosystems found in Ecuador. Basically, what would the country look like without any human modification to the landscape? The data that we're using here is the global potential habitat distributions, which follow the IUCN habitat classification system. You can see the results here that obviously Ecuador is in a natural state would be primarily made up of forested areas, as well as quite extensive shrubland and grassland ecosystems. So this sets a baseline for the natural state of ecosystems and can help guide actions or activities within restoration priorities for what sorts of habitats can be rebuilt through restoration. Next slide, please. So step 2 is mapping the opportunities for ecosystem restoration. And we do want to acknowledge here that we understand that the opportunities for restoration depend on many factors in terms of local community involvement, desires, local constraints on land use that can influence restoration opportunities. So here, when we say restoration opportunities, we're just thinking about kind of national level geospatial analyses. And in particular, what we did here is really to just map degraded areas across Ecuador as potential candidates for restoration. Now, degradation can occur for multiple reasons, and we've tried to capture these different reasons within this work. My colleague Scott Atkinson's led this work and will be presenting it in detail next. So here I'll just briefly outline that the degraded areas we're mapping includes areas which are degraded because of reduced productivity. So reduced net primary productivity, or the way we measure it, Scott will go into detail. Places can also be degraded because of land use change, conversion to agricultural and urban areas, as well as other forms of human footprint, such as infrastructures, road networks, human settlements. So all 3 of these were considered by Scott using 3 primary data sets, which he'll present to you in detail, and we'll have the opportunity for feedback on that work. Next slide, please. So the third step was work to map the potential benefits of restoration. Here we wanted to determine the extent and overlap of ecological values that could benefit from restoration activities. These values span biodiversity, climate change, human well-being. Like I said, much of our work went into this aspect of the restoration dossier. There were 29 individual data sources, primarily national data sources, to map these benefits. And my colleague Dijan will present those data in detail and elicit your feedback later in this session. Next slide, please. So here I've jumped forward a little bit to step 6 in the dossier, which is the actual priority mapping for restoration. The map you see on the right there, I do want to outline that, you know, this is our draft priority map for Ecuador, but we expect this to change significantly based on feedback that we receive through this session today, and we will be revising the input data sets that will then influence this priority map before finalizing the restoration dossier. And I'll be presenting a little bit later on a little bit more detail in terms of how we integrate the previous steps and their data to produce this map. Next slide, please. So this is step 4 in the restoration dossier, but as I mentioned, we haven't completed this work. This is the work to evaluate some of the trade-offs of restoration. This is trade-offs around the opportunity costs of restoration. Again, as was mentioned earlier in the session, restoration has many benefits, but it also has some costs. One of the most important costs of restoration can be the opportunity costs of foregoing or not undertaking agriculture within landscapes that are restored. We have data, global data, mapping agricultural suitability across Ecuador. You can see the data here on the right panel. We are able, within the restoration work that we're undertaking here, we're able to integrate this agricultural suitability, so proxy for agricultural opportunity cost, into the priority setting, such that we can identify restoration priorities in Ecuador that maximize benefits while minimizing conflict with these high agricultural areas. So we have a question for you is, do you think it would be good for us to include this analysis to minimize opportunity costs? And do you have national data on agricultural suitability that you would prefer us to use if we do this? Next slide, please. Now, another important consideration for the trade-offs of restoration is potential climate risks. Ecosystem restoration often takes decades for the benefits to be fully yielded, for instance, to regrow a forest. At the same time, we understand that climate changes can be driving large-scale ecosystem disruption, which could undermine restoration activities. It's possible that, for instance, an area might be restored into a forested ecosystem, but climate change might lead to an increase in temperature and a decrease of water availability, which might flip that system into a shrub or grassland system, which would undermine that restoration in that area. We have some data to try to quantify this climate risk. It's this data that you're seeing here on restoration resilience across Ecuador. One of our struggles with these data are that they're very coarse resolution. You can see that there's only approximately a dozen pixels of data across the country. So we have a question for you is, would you value us incorporating this climate risk into identifying restoration priorities in Ecuador? And could you help us identify better national data to reflect climate risk? Okay, thank you very much for this kind of overview presentation. We're going to hear next from Scott Atkinson on the degradation mapping, and then from Dijon, a lot more detail on the data that we've used. But if there are any comments or questions now before the feedback session, I'm happy to take those.
Muchas gracias, Oscar, por tu presentación. Efectivamente,
Thank you so much, Oscar, for your presentation. Of course, if you have any questions or feedback with regards to the data sets used that Oscar has just presented in an overview, of course, as he said, This presentation will dig deeper into this. And Byron said, what are the data sources for national details or data? We will look into this through this presentation, and this will be, of course, part of our conversation. Of course, you will certainly find national data. Manuel, yes. Great to see you. Over to you. Thank you. Thank you, Cassandra. Can you hear me? Loud and clear. Thank you so much for your presentations. I just wanted to make a reflection, kind of an overall reflection. I think it's very important to see what you are presenting. It's an exercise that is a simple analysis of geospatial information, but I think that's what's most interesting is methodological decisions that overlie this. And there's a substantial part that has to do with the approach per se on a methodological level. And I think it would be great to have the opportunity to discuss this, not just the sources, not just whether or not we may refine or fine-tune better data. We can always search for better data and optimize or get the best out of the existing information. But what I think may be missing is discuss what are the methodological bases that are pushing forward this exercise. And I think it could be a different approach, maybe step a little bit back and look what's the underlying thing that is guiding this process. Thank you so much, Manuel. And I don't think that a different space will be necessary. I think that we will be actually tapping into this at this precise session. So thank you for your intervention. Hopefully we will be meeting your expectations in the next two presentations that we have in place. First one, that of Scott Atkinson, who will be sharing the methodology used for the mapping of degraded areas in Ecuador. And the second presentation will be from Oscar Vento, once again, the scientific lead of the project, who will show and share with us the methodology used in order to have that first iteration of the restoration map in Ecuador. So since we'll be focusing on the methodological aspects in the upcoming minutes, if you deem it convenient after the presentations, we can, of course, if that question is still not answered, the scientific leaders will be here for you to ask that question again. Now we will move on to Scott Atkinson's presentation with regards to the methodology for mapping degradation.
Hi, everybody. In this short presentation, we're just going to briefly go over how we map degradation and what data sets we identify areas that were created and therefore create areas that we identify suitable for restoration. So we use two data sources to identify degradation. First of which is the world cover data. The second is Earth, and the third is footprint. We'll discuss a little bit more about each one. So the ESA world cover data is an annual picture of the length of a map provided by the French agency. This is a pretty big step forward. Some of you might be several hundred in the world cover data set. Also produced differences between all of them. Our use case here, we are using the world cover data, which is what we found it does a little bit better job, in particular mapping urban areas. There have been a few projects that people have carried out recently. They're all very similar. Accuracy not as necessarily any better than if they were. We don't use the entire world cover data set. We are using only two land classes these urban areas, cultural areas, furniture, and a sense of situation. To the left there is, I believe, downtown Manhattan in New York. Completely removed, highly degraded area. On the right is a coffee plantation in Colombia. It is still a conversion from natural and integrated. We might some areas in the world on these are again areas that would be suitable for some sort of restoration. We don't have very good global capture from similar to identify what is a pasture land versus a grassland. From the second that we use is coming from Transit International. Online, but it's also areas of conservation lined in with the SDG 15.3 as something binary. Either there's no change, there's transfiguration, or there's been an improvement. And what they mean is they're talking about rather starting from trends nature data and the trajectory change. And in the case of Trans-Earth, they consider a decline in any one of these three indicators input data set the human footprint and but it follows the same methodology. 15 years and mapping. The footprint's useful for identifying those really capture those color and structure, the linear road, etc. that go off in through habitats and through environments. Fire. Value of 4, which is to identify areas no longer intact, that are equal to 4 are considered to no longer be ecologically intact. So those areas would be suitable. The other form is doing for installation. We consider it to be really high. So one category, 0. Presents those as well, that is degraded, or it's not degraded, or human practice. If something is involved, a human footprint value of 4, then it value of 3. If they all agree and the same pixel, so if any one of those input processes area, so basically, if any one of these data sets indicates how the analysis is occurring, we consider it. And just what we're really doing is we are mapping areas where. So this is the rough area now. We're talking about further in this project. Various actions. So then it comes to the question. My name is Scott. I'm going to sign off on this presentation right now, but hopefully this can good come.
Muchas gracias. Scott no está aquí el día de hoy.
Thank you so much, Scott. He is now based in Australia, on the other end of the globe. He will probably be sleeping, but the whole scientific team is online, and the team may be able to answer any technical concerns or questions that we may have as of his last presentations. If there is no question, it will be still very good as a former introduction to Oscar Venter upcoming presentation with regards to the methodology that has been used with regards to the identification of priority areas of restoration in Ecuador. So if there are no questions or comments with regards to the former presentation by Scott, we may now delve into Oscar's presentation. We will later on have more of an interactive session, and we'll probably answer some of the questions that have popped up in terms of the data used. I think there are no current questions with regards to Scott's presentation. So Oscar, take it away.
Sorry, I just needed to unmute myself. Thank you, Cassandra, for the introduction to this second presentation from me. Thank you, Manuel, for the question about methodology and the need to unpack that. In this presentation, I will give you a fairly high-level overview of the methodology we're using in the dossier. But in order to try and make this this overall session as streamlined as possible and respect everybody's time contribution here, this is quite a brief presentation. So after I'm done, feel free, we have time to ask any further questions you might have. So our basic methodology is designed to answer the central question, which is using systematic conservation planning, and I'll spend a bit of time discussing those methods, to identify priority places in Ecuador to restore in order to maximize the benefits to biodiversity, climate change, and human well-being. Next slide, please. Now, the methods that we're using here, as well as the spatial data, really leverages a very large effort that was undertaken in 2021 to develop maps of essential life support areas in Ecuador. The methods for that also work started with an in-depth policy review and hackathon to identify environmental policies in Ecuador that were the highest priority for outcomes for biodiversity, climate change, and human well-being. There was then extensive work by a national team to collect data from partners, institutions within Ecuador to spatially map the values that were highlighted in that policy review. There was then a number of consultation sessions to extract national stakeholder and expert opinion on the relative value of each of those spatial data sets in terms of environmental outcomes. All of this was then brought together using systematic conservation planning to identify these priority areas to protect, manage, and restore. So the work that we're discussing today really builds off this past effort. There are quite a bit of resources that describe this effort that we're able to share with you. Anybody who's curious, but in this presentation, I'm just going to give a very broad overview of these methods. Next slide, please. So, sorry, could you go back one slide? Thank you. I think the first question that we do need to address is, why are we using systematic conservation planning tools? And the reason is that land use decision-making using spatial data is very complex. In this hypothetical landscape I'm showing you here, there's only about 300 pixels. And if we were trying to decide which of these pixels to restore and which to not restore, the number of different networks of restored areas that we could choose is nearly infinite. There's more networks of restored areas within this little landscape than there are atoms in the known universe. So these decisions are very complex, and obviously that is highly magnified when we move from a simple landscape like this into the landscape of Ecuador. Next slide, please. So that's why we use systematic conservation planning tools. These are optimization approaches that you can feed in data, which I'm going to just give you an overview of what that data looks like to help identify priority areas. So to use systematic conservation planning tools, we can break down the methodology into 3 basic steps. Obviously, there's a lot of detail in each of these steps. The first step is that these tools serve to achieve or are guided by area-based targets. Now, in the case of restoration, this means a national target for restoring ecosystems in Ecuador. Here, we've adopted the Target 2 of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is to restore 30% of degraded areas. Now, this is 30% not of the national area, but of degraded areas. So based on the degradation mapping that Scott just presented, that 30% target equates to about 15.7% of Ecuador's land area that we're using conservation planning, systematic conservation planning, to identify as the highest priority. Next slide, please. Thank you. The next step in using these tools is to identify places within the country where restoration might be feasible. Now, we call these the hard constraints on areas that could be considered for restoration. This comes also from the degradation mapping, so you can start to see how important that mapping is to us. So the areas shown in orange in this map are currently the ones that we have mapped as degraded. These are areas which are under consideration within the conservation planning tool for restoration. Next slide, please. So the third and final step is really the heart of the analysis and work, and that is that this tool it uses an optimization approach called integer linear programming and a software package called Prioritizer. Those are details that probably aren't important for most, but it uses those techniques to identify locations that serve to maximize the environmental outcomes, in particular the outcomes for biodiversity, the outcomes for climate change, and the outcomes through ecosystem services for human well-being. So in order to do this optimization, we needed to map these various benefits. Next slide, please. Thank you. So Dijan will look at these individual layers in detail. Here I'm just giving you kind of overview maps that serve to overlap all the ways we've mapped biodiversity within Ecuador, the ways we've mapped climate change that can benefit from restoration, and ecosystem services and human well-being that could benefit from ecosystem restoration. So the optimization software is trying to maximize the combined benefits to all of these values as it identifies the restoration priorities. Next slide. So the final output from the software is a map of priority areas for restoration. Again, this is just a draft map, and we expect it to change potentially substantially as we continue on this work. So this priority map is showing the 30% of degraded areas that, if restored, would lead to the greatest benefits to biodiversity, human well-being, and climate change, based on all the data that we've given in. So that's just my overview of the methodology of how we bring the spatial data together using systematic conservation planning. Again, this really leverages the past work within the country, much of it led by the national teams, to map the essential life support areas. And we probably have time for any questions, Cassandra.
Claro, claro que sí.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Oscar, for your presentation. Here we have already a question for you. I see that you have compared these results with the Ecuador ELSA results. Have you considered comparing the official outcome related to priority areas of the national project for restoration of landscape? This is something that we will check when it comes to reviewing this data. But in any case, I'm going to give Oscar the time to answer this question. I'm going to translate it and paste it in the chat for you to read it, if it's easier for you, Oscar.
No, thank you for that translation. Thank you for that
Gracias
comment.
Por ese comentario.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question. We haven't evaluated the agreement between the map that we're showing you here and the map that you reference. I'll ask my colleague Dee to let us know, do we have those data on the map of restoration priorities, the national map from Ecuador? I think if we do have those data already, we would love to perform that analysis.
We do have a layer on forest restoration priority provided by the Ministry of Environment. And we also have another layer on the National Restoration Agreement. Both these layers are considered within our analysis in selecting the restoration priorities. And we have also included many other layers to identify restoration priorities for other ecosystems. And Fabian, if there are other layers that are national restoration priority or project covers other ecosystem, please let us know. Currently, it's the 2-layer that we have and have used in the analysis.
Claro que sí, vamos a tener ese espacio.
Yes, we're going to have a space for feedback precisely to include the national required layers according to the analysis groups, Fabian. With this, I think we have clarified your doubts, Fabian, but we will see in detail this when we check the layers of data that we have used. Manuel? Yes, thank you, Cassandra and Oscar, for the excellent presentation. My question has to do with what's mentioned before. There are 2 elements to highlight related to each other. The first is the mapping of degradation that defines your universe of optimization. These are the areas that you use for building your strategy. In our experience of mapping of the process at the national level, we see that normally the databases and the algorithms, such as the Trans-Earth, do not behave well in a country like Ecuador that is characterized by environmental gradients in short distances. In this regard, the question is, are you considering generating degradation outcomes that are better adjusted to this variability that we find in Ecuador, for example? One of the initiatives and one of the ideas that we have been discussing with our colleagues that we are discussing is the stratification, not using the same criteria in zones of lowland forest or Andean area or the valleys. And there are other zones that we can stratify in our country, but at least in those zones, we can think in improving the representation of the degradation processes. And another variable that we have discussed, especially because of productivity issues, is to adjust our algorithms to the bioclimate regime. Because if we work in low land forests, we have a certain behavior of these approaches if we compare to this to dry forests. So the question is that if you are thinking in creating a degradation output that might be adjusted to the specific context of Ecuador. Thank you, Manuel. Do you have any answer or Oscar to provide in this regard or something to say to what he just highlighted?
I would give a general comment, Manuel, that the purpose for coming with an initial map of degraded areas like the one we showed previously was for it to act as a starting point for our degradation mapping. And we are certainly considering the options of improving that mapping. It sounds like you've personally and your colleagues, it sounds like you're working with others, have put a lot of thought into how to do this better for Ecuador. So my question would be, do you have either some firm advice for how we could do this better, or might there even be national data that has come up with a differential approach across Ecuador's various ecosystems for degradation mapping, something better than what we've done here?
Okay, thank you, Oscar. I'll switch to English, perhaps, just to make it faster. Yeah, the short question, the short
No hay
answer.
problema, Manuel. No hay problema. Puedes hablar en español.
Manuel, you can speak in Spanish because we have interpretation in English. Because
Okay,
otherwise, people
okay.
who are in the Spanish channel are going to lose part of the information.
Okay, la respuesta corta es sí, o sea,
So the
hay
short answer,
procesos.
yes, there are processes.
Perdón, tengo que cambiar el.
Yes, there are processes of work, both at the level of improving the processes and at the level of information, but this requires maybe a process, a more specific process of interaction with you, of understanding better the fine details about the sources of data and the methodology you're using, not only from the point of view of integrating the example that we were mentioning, but other variables that you are optimizing for the exercise. Because yes, we can explore precisely there some methodologically interesting decisions. In a nutshell, we are working to establish goals for eventually reaching this at the national level, and the general structure of the methodological process that we have ahead, because this is an ongoing process, is very similar to the things that you have highlighted. So I think, yes, we could coordinate better and precisely explore together these opportunities for improving both processes. Thank you, Manuel, for your contribution. So let's see if this exercise precisely will derive in the next sessions to come in precisely the explanation of the data layers, both for the first map of degradation and the first map of prioritization of the map that are the inputs for the elaboration of dossier, and this feedback process that is going to help us to examine layer by layer. I'm going to give you the floor, Byron, for the last presentation before taking a 10 minutes break that you, the presenters, and the audience deserve in order to continue successfully with this session. Byron, the floor is yours. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for this kind invitation. All the presentations have been quite interesting, and I wanted to clarify something. And thank you for giving me the opportunity of speaking before the break. I'm the delegate of the Subsecretariat on Climate Change from the Ministry of Environment, Water, and Ecological Transition. Our Subsecretariat in Ecuador has commitments through the United Nations Convention to combat desertification and also the UN Convention on Climate Change. The combination of these two conventions are part of the work we do in our secretariat. And we have a portfolio of at least 30 projects of international cooperation, among them projects from the FAO, PNUD, that cooperate with our country for the development of these policies and for Ecuador to comply with the commitments acquired. Precisely, with all this information in our subsecretariat, we are taking into account now this initiative. Our work is precisely to make sure that the different initiatives related with the degradation of land can be aligned with the needs of our country, and precisely not to maybe ignore the efforts of other initiatives that might have started in our national territory. In Ecuador, currently, we have the project of the of neutrality and degradation of land, and Pablo Cáceres and another coordinator from the Ministry of Environment are participating, and they have a responsibility and are helping to implement these efforts coordinated with the UN Convention to combat desertification. So the idea that I wanted to highlight is that these initiatives need to be aligned with the channels and the processes that are existing, and precisely coordinate with the focal points that are already there and coordinate these efforts through our secretariat so that you can have access to territorial information and the access that you need in terms of the portfolios of the state and the articulation with other ongoing projects that are performed by these initiatives. I just wanted to say this for you to take into account, and also taking into account the concerns on climate change. And for us, we saw at the beginning that this initiative was maybe isolated and we didn't have a participation. And we are glad to see the efforts that are present in the dossier. Thank you, Byron, for your contribution. And of course, we count on your participation. Precisely, the idea is that all stakeholders participate. We have shared this information with that purpose. You, the monitoring team, Fabian, who's also writing in the chat. You will receive these documents 1 week before. This first session somehow is to give you a general overview of the project. We are giving these first steps of this project. You will have more time for reviewing the materials, and of course, we will count on your feedback, and we are happy to receive your feedback, not only in the data that we're going to use and the methodology of the dossier, but also the institutional coordinations, because it's necessary for us to approach institutions in order to collect updated data, and that's the task of Maria. She's the national consultant in Ecuador for this program, and Byron, you have been delegated by the ministry as one of the technical focal points of this project, and we're going to be contacting you. Also, Fabian, for the respective collection of the necessary data. But as I said before, we are in the first steps of the project, and we are definitely interested in joining our efforts with the country, and that is why we have here representatives of the different efforts you have highlighted, both from the directorates of the Ministry of Environment of Ecuador, but also from other institutions that are supporting us, both from the government and non-governmental organizations such as CI, representatives of the CBD, and also TNC, among others. Thank you for these last comments. With this, we can take a break. Let's take a 10 minutes break, and we're going to have the countdown here on the screen, and that gives us time to see how the soccer match is going. Is tied at this moment. So we count on your participation. So please come back after this 10 minutes break for the rest of the session. See you in 10 minutes. Thank you.
3, 2, 1.
3, 2, 1, and go. So we're back. So for our next break, we'll probably put up some music. We had these Elsa breaks with music. So welcome back. I see that you're all here. Ecuador is now back on the football field, and I'm looking very closely at the match results to see if participants who leave the session are actually looking at the football match, and he's also paying attention to that. I'm just talking about this Latin America phenomenon of soccer or football. So Disang will be now explaining to us the data used for this project with the goal of mapping those priority areas for restoration. And we will be able also to answer many of the questions that we have been collecting throughout the session. I've noted them down, so I've kept them to the end of your presentation. Over to you. Take it away, please.
Gracias, Cassandra. Hi, everyone. I'm Dijang. I'm a spatial planning and biodiversity expert with UNDP. It's my pleasure to be here and introduce the overall data structure of the restoration mapping, the current national data we used to create the first iteration of restoration map in Ecuador that Oscar just introduced. It is important for us to focus on spatial data we are using in this project to help the mapping process to be more accurately reflect the priority areas for restoration in the country and to locate our actions on the ground. So my introduction here is mainly to help you understand the data structure of this mapping process. What types of data do we need? What are the current data we are using? And more importantly, is to hear from your feedback in the next session. We need your review and your expert opinion, mainly on the 3 aspects. Well, first is the overall approach. Are there any suggestions to improve this work? And from the data perspective, is there any better data or more updated data than the current layer we're using? Also, are there any other elements or additional data we should consider and include in this mapping process? With that, I want to start my presentation with an overview of the data structure. We can broadly break them down into 4 data groups: the base map or planning features, zones, and optionally locking constraints. In today's discussion, our main focus will be the planning features. And to look at each layer more specifically, each group has slightly different requirements on the spatial data used. Here is a full list of layer we used in the overall analysis. For those who joined the ALSA workshop, this may look a bit similar. A lot of the national data used here were identified through a more in-depth policy hackathon and data hackathon to identify spatial data that can help represent 10 most important commitments to nature and climate in the country. We will start with base map or planning units. The base map defines the range and scale of our planning area. And here we are doing a national scale mapping. So we're using the national boundary of Ecuador as the base map. Then the planning area will be divided into a set of discrete areas. In GIS term, it equals to pixels of a raster layer, where each unit can be independently calculated and selected. The size of planning units are determined by multiple factors, such as resolution of the input data and the implementation needs of the country. And here we are using a resolution of 250 meters. And this ends up a large large analysis with over 4 million planning units. We also extended a bit of the national terrestrial boundary to cover the mangroves. So for the question earlier on if we considered the marine ecosystem, we didn't. This analysis focused mainly on terrestrial land, but we did try to extend a bit to cover the mangrove and the other important coastal features. Then the next group, our main focus today is the planning features. These are the layers that can spatially identify restoration needs as well as benefits. We have broadly grouped them down into 3 data clusters: benefit for biodiversity, benefit for climate change mitigation, and benefit for human well-being. And we will start with layers in biodiversity. This include nationally identified important and representative ecosystems. The first layer is the national data on native forest. This is extracted from the land cover data in 2018, a national data provided by Ministry of Environment, Water, and Ecological Transition. Next is also a national data on the distribution of mangrove forest. And we also included Palamos distribution in Ecuador. And is this also a national data? Next is the Ramsar site in Ecuador. These are internationally important wetlands that have biodiversity value or provide important ecosystem services. And then we have national defined forest restoration priority. This map is the national identification of potential areas that meet natural and social characteristics for the invention of forest restoration process. Together, the potential area for restoration identified in this data takes up about 18% of Ecuador. We have applied a higher weight to area identified as high priority for restoration in the overall analysis to increase their representativeness. The next layer is national defined protected forest based on the land use capacity. This includes forest estate and forest to stop deforestation. Then the next layer is the nationally identified priority biodiversity areas in Ecuador. Together, these biodiversity priority takes about 60% of the national land. And then the key biodiversity area are internationally important areas for biodiversity. They have prioritized area based on the vulnerability and uniqueness of wildlife species. These are also identified as the most important sites for biodiversity in Ecuador. Then we have also included a layer on conservation gaps in the national protected area system. This is a national layer provided by Condesian and Maiti, Ministry of Environment. A large area here are KBAs that are not covered by existing protected areas. The next layer is biosphere reserves. These are reserves that are representative terrestrial or aquatic environments to promote a balanced relationship between human and nature. And this is also a national layer provided by the Ministry of Environment. Then we also have bird species richness, a national layer to represent the diversity of bird species. And we can see on the slide, the area in green and yellow color have highest species richness in Ecuador, and these areas follow along the Andes Mountain. are important sites for bird diversity. Next is also in national data on the connectivity of vegetation communities. The levels of connectivity is classified from very high to very low. And in this layer, we highlighted area with very high connectivity. The last layer in biodiversity group is the vulnerable agriculture frontier. These are areas that are suitable for agriculture and pasture land, but currently are still important ecosystem or biodiversity areas, including mangrove, forest, KBAs, and priority biodiversity areas. So as they are suitable for agriculture, but as they are still carrying important ecosystem values, they are regarded as vulnerable agriculture frontiers that we need to put more efforts on the maintaining and the restoration. Next are features on climate and carbon that can potentially benefit from restoration activities. First, we used a global layer here on the natural climate solution opportunities based on carbon deficit. It can also be referred as unrealized potential carbon. These are potential additional land carbon storage attributable to restoration activities on woody carbon stocks and associated soils, such as reforestation activity on the area identified as identified for restoration action. They have large potential to increase the carbon storage. And such restoration opportunity area identified takes up about 9% of national areas in Ecuador. Next layer is a soil organic carbon. Soil organic carbon influences the soil fertility, health, and functioning. And here we used in national data provided by MAG, Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock. The carbon found in the form of slightly altered organic residues of plants, animals, and microorganisms are regarded as soil organic carbon. Next, we have several layers to help identify the potential risk or pressures on ecosystems. First is the susceptibility, sorry about the word, susceptibility to desertification. These are areas that are susceptible to desertification threats at the national level. Then another layer is the susceptibility to flooding risk. These is also mapped at national level, and areas highlighted in green and yellow are at a higher risk of flooding. And then we also included the risk of forest fires, and these high risk area concentrate along the Andes Mountain in the forest ecosystem. And the next layer is the drought risk area susceptible to threats from meteorological drought at national level. And these are national layer provided by IGM. The last layer in the climate cluster is the susceptibility to mass movement. This help identify the displacement of soil, rock, and land downslope by the force of gravity. So these layers here will help identify potential risk of degradation, and area that calls for attention on restoration activities. The next part are layers we use to map potential benefits for human well-being with restoration actions. And we start with the social forest program area. These are national defined areas that belong to natural or legal persons and maintain native forest, palamu, or other native vegetation formations while complying with the objectives indicated in the agreement established by the social forest program. And the next layer is production forest. This is a layer extracted from the capacity of land use map provided by the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock. Then we have also included the indigenous territories within the scoop of the Amazonia network of georeferenced social environmental information for the Ecuadorian Amazon. The next feature we considered is the important water source, and these water source areas are declared as public interest for maintenance and conservation, which supply human consumption or guarantee food security. Then the next layer in the human well-being group is a layer for us to include the coastal region of Ecuador. And as you can see, many of the national layer used above is lacking coverage for Galapagos. So here we specifically included 3 layers on Galapagos zoning. We have considered the 3 zones of Galapagos, including the intangible zone, the conservation zone, where there are non-extractive activities such as tourism, as well as the sustainable use zone. And above are the planning features we have used to map the first iteration of restoration mapping. Again, the planning feature data is providing a basis or important input information for the tool to select the area with the highest ecological value and with highest importance to input restoration efforts. Next, I also want to briefly introduce the other types of data in this mapping analysis, including zones and lock-ins. Zones, like introduced by Oscar earlier, is a special hard constraint for the analysis to select the restoration priority areas only within the zones defined. This is a binary data. And for this iteration, we have used the degraded areas mapped by Scott in his presentation, also showed in his presentation earlier. So when we're applying the degraded area as the zone, the final map on the restoration priority will only be selected within these degraded areas defined. And our last data type is called lock-in constraint. By selecting an area to lock in, it ensures that the final restoration map will include these areas. And here we have locked in the National Restoration Agreement as a lock-in constraint. And this covers about nearly 3% of Ecuador. And this is also a national data provided by Mayet for the year 2014. Above are all the spatial data we used, and I hope my introduction helps you understand the overall data structure And again, back to the beginning of my presentation, what we really want to hear from you is your feedback, your suggestions and comments to help improve the data used and improve our methodology here to map the restoration priority areas to meet the need of the country. And with that, I'll say thank you and over to Cassandra.
Muchas gracias, Dee, por la excelente
Thank you, Dee, for your great presentation. I also highlight the questions we received at the beginning of the session. One of them, Dee, has been answered by you, Dee, and I'm also pasting them in English in the chat. Fabian was asking if the ELSA area should include marine coastal areas. Also, another question has to do with access to the mapping carried out in Galapagos, and you have answered that about the layers that you use with regards to the intangible zone, to the sustainable zone in Galapagos. And the third question had to do with the quantification of a key ecosystem to be restored. D, if we can respond these initial questions. I have written the questions for you to read them in English. And after that, I'm going to give the floor to Pablo. D, the floor is yours again.
Thanks for these questions. I'll answer them one by one. The first one, if we have included coastal marine regions, we did try to capture the coastal features, including the mangrove, but the overall analyze here is mainly focusing on terrestrial land of Ecuador, so it didn't extend too much to the marine region. And the second one, the map we used for Galapagos. So in my introduction, we want to highlight Galapagos in the analysis, and that's why we included 3 zones to map areas within Galapagos that are able for sustainable use or conserved areas. But as many national data here covers mainland only, we are also trying to explore what other features or more detailed features we can capture for Galapagos. But the zoning layer Oscar, Scott, and I all introduced has covered Galapagos and has mapped areas that are potentially in degradation in Galapagos. So there we can include Galapagos into the restoration priority mapping. And then the third question, are there plans to quantify key ecosystem service? Yes, so there are some consideration or data we included on ecosystem service, like the water provision, but also a series of data to identify the potential threats on ecosystem. We are open for suggestions or feedback on what other aspects should we include, and if there are other data available to identify the restoration needs on ecosystem services. And Cassandra, I
Muchas
see the
gracias,
board.
Dee.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dee. Sorry, you were going to say something else? Sorry that I interrupted you. Would you wanted to complement what you were saying?
I'm just mentioning I saw a 4th question in the thread on if we have incorporated mining information. I don't think we have included the mining layer so far, but if that's an important element to consider, we're open for suggestions on how we can make them included.
Claro que sí, eso yo
Thank
iba a
you.
comentar que
Yes, I was going to comment that we can see this with the Excel, in which we will be able to see layer by layer. And before, I want to give the floor to Pablo, who was raising the hand after Paul's comment. Yes, Paul, we're going to see where can we include this mining layer in the types of analysis. And Paul, you have the floor briefly to enter precisely in the feedback session. Pablo, you have the floor. Thank you, Cassandra. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. I have three questions I wanted to raise, and I wanted to I wanted to thank Dee for the presentation that she delivered. The first has to do with the fact that we have a big set of data of information. So I want to ask, in terms of the spatial resolution of each one of these layers, how the homogenization process took place. How were they homogenized? And or how was one layer origin that makes several scales? There are some global scales, there are some local scales. So that's my first question, the homogenization. And the second has to do with the rationale before the use of such a diverse set of information. And with this, I mean the following. Based on my experience, in this type of exercises, sometimes it's better to have just a few layers, but very representative layers. So instead of having a big set of data or layers to work. So I think this review, if I don't know if you were able to perform it, the rationale behind this. Why are we using each one of these layers of information? And the third question had to do with an administrative contractual aspect of the project. We have had, and we're going to have a feedback session. How flexible is the process, and how much time there is available for the application of this adjustment and changes as were raised by Byron? We have ongoing processes related to this degradation of land topic. We are trying to create an enabled framework precisely to have a baseline of degradation of land that may respond to the methodological framework of the UN Convention to combat desertification. So we are very interested in knowing what would be this period that you would have available for the adjustments and the level of flexibility of the project in order to somehow align this, as Byron said, and so that we don't end up presenting just a traditional output, but to present an output that is in line with the purposes and the objectives that we have of creating a national action plan to deal with the degradation of land in Ecuador. These are these three items I wanted to highlight. Thank you. Thank you, Pablo. Dee, if you agree, I'm going to answer the last question while you check the first two technical answers related to your presentation. So, Pablo, regarding to what you said in the last question, Enrique Paniagua started his presentation explaining the timeline of the project, in which we have approximately up to the end of November to have the dossier ready for this project of restoring hope in Ecuador. So in this timeline, we have this first meeting with the key stakeholders in which we are showing this first review of the data, this first iteration of the prioritization of areas for restoration in Ecuador for the corresponding feedback. That is not going to be over today. We're going to send the dossier and the whole information. This draft will be sending it to you to receive your feedback, and then have a second round of consultation and review, working together in October. And I think it's important for us to be clear that this does not finish in these two spaces, but instead, Maria Veronica, the national coordinator for UNDP Ecuador, is going to approach one-on-one the different entities in order to review, on one side, the best representative data, and also to verify the synergies that may take place within the framework of this project. Don't worry, we are precisely in this first step of creating synergy. We are the UN, and our intention is to provide support to the countries so that they can attain their national goals within the framework of an international context. So if you can support me in silencing your microphone if you're not speaking, those that want to add something, please raise your hand. We have just a few moments for the feedback session. So I'm going to give the floor D to respond the technical questions posed by Pablo. And then after D, I'm going to give the floor to Aracelis to have the feedback session in which we will see layer by layer everything, and we will know what the next steps are going to be. D, the floor is yours once again.
Thank you, Pablo, for these wonderful questions. So first, for your first one on the resolution of the data, indeed, the input layers we used all have different resolution, but here in the mapping analysis, we're using a size of the planning unit of 250 meters, which means the resolution of the overall analysis is 250 meters. And this is based on a consideration of our input data. For example, the degradation map is mapped on 250 meters, and many of our input data have a higher or equal resolution like that. So when we can capture most information at this scale. Also, this is a much higher resolution than the ALSA mapping, because here for restoration mapping, we want to make it a higher as a higher resolution to be able to feedback on like regional level or even local level actions, and it can be more useful for at the application stage if we can have a final product that validated by the country and by the stakeholders. The second question on why we're using these big sets of layers, I agree with you that this can be more representative. A brief background on why we're using this data set is there has been a in-depth process with 2 rounds of consultation with the national experts on what are the most important policy commitments in Ecuador on nature, climate, and sustainable development. And these spatial data are selected based on these 10 policy targets. So we are trying to capture as much as potential benefits or synergies that restoration activities could bring for biodiversity, for climate change mitigation, for carbon storage, water security, food security, etc. And I think that's why we're selecting multiple layers to identify these different potential benefits. And also Oscar can jump in here to illustrate further on the layer selected. I hope that answers your question.
Incredibly thorough, D. In the interest of time, I won't add much. I'll just reiterate that while the action is single that we're considering here, restoration, the objectives are multiple, all guided by those 10 priority targets. So the diversity of data helps reflect the diversity of objectives being sought. Thanks for the question, Pablo. Appreciate it.
Muchas gracias a ti.
Thank you, Dee and Oscar for the answers. And Araceli, you have the floor before our feedback session. That should be the longest of the workshop, but we are against time. Thank you, Araceli, Sebastian. I hope you can hear me and you can see me. I just want to speak about a relevant issue. Thank you for the information you have provided today. I think it's very important to see the different layers and the different approaches. But my question is, if this information is complementary to the one that the Ministry of Environment has available, or if this is information that gives a final use in terms of creation of public policy, because the program of restoration in Ecuador has been working hard on this, on how to perform restoration in the different ecosystem. Several working groups have been created and even technical guidelines on how to do this. And I'm not sure if these elements have been considered in this process. That is why I was asking, and I want to know if there is going to be a highest a process of feedback. But it's very important to pay attention to the final use of this information, because in the end, the public actors, the Ministry of Environment, uh, because several maps have been elaborated on climate change in different areas in Ecuador. So I want to see how a match can be made of these two sources of information. Yes, Aracelis, this is what we have mentioned from the beginning of this session. What the vision is of this is to make it an input for the country. And precisely we're going to cross this information. And the idea is that it's useful for the elaboration of public policy in Ecuador within the framework of the Ecuadorian Initiative for the Restoration of Landscape. The idea was to have this first approach to a broader group that involves the Ministry of Environment, but other actors that are implementing actions with regards to restoration efforts. Byron, the last contribution before we go to the feedback session about the layers used for this mapping. And Byron, I'm taking notes of all the comments you have made about the agricultural boundaries in the Galapagos Islands. Byron, the floor is yours. This is going to complement what I said. This is going to be one of the inputs for the last stage of the feedback. Once again, as the colleague Aracelis said from the Andes project, I'm from the Subsecretariat of Climate Change. Since we are coordinating this, we can see the needs of the different projects of what is needed for the elaboration of public policy. We are on the verge of approving law on climate change in Ecuador. So all the inputs proposed by the project are paying attention to the needs because we are coordinating public policies in this regard on climate change. So I understand that this is a pilot project, and I think based on our experience, we can make this applicable to large-scale projects. We have heard about this project, Restoring Hope in Ecuador, but unfortunately, many of the actions that were performed were not consulted with our subsecretariat. Our needs were not heard or taken into account. And that is why, to the scales that you are working, we are working with a more local scale, taking into account information about climate seasons in Ecuador, and the INAME in Ecuador is doing this. But for the access of information that is available in the Ministry of Agriculture and Environment, you need to coordinate. It's necessary to have coordination to obtain this sensitive data of Ecuador. And this is vital for these efforts. So I just wanted to make clear this call of attention for our broader collaboration and coordination, and use the channels, or at least this channel that is open with our subsecretariat, because it's very important for us to be in line with the guidelines of the UN conventions related. Thank you for your space. Yes, I completely agree. Even one of the results of these projects or the output is precisely that we, the different stakeholders, may sit on the same table through the different coordinations we can promote from the UN so that we can make a collective review of the articulation and synergies that are possible. This is the first meeting that we have with the stakeholders involved. This is the first of many meetings, so we are going to make the necessary coordinations as it should be. Thank you, Byron, for your contribution. And what we can do then, with regards to the data layers that you were mentioning, we're going to check that on Excel. And yes, thank you for what you shared. If we can share the link of the Excel and share the screen so that we can explain what the exercise is going to be about. So please share the Excel. We're going to check this Excel together and receive your feedback on the different data layers used for the construction of this degradation map. We're going to check some of these data layers, but if you have any comment on the different maps, we will also show the map if necessary to check it together. I'm going to access right now to the Excel as well. You all have access to this Excel, but I'm going to thank you if we can receive your systematic contributions. Let's not make comments on the Excel without a previous warning. Let's not modify or change the color or erase part of the information that has been entered. So my suggestion is the following. Let's start by tab number 2, in which you can see, sorry if this tab was not translated, but what you see on tab number 2, money, click tab number 2, and we're going to receive the feedback on the data used on the degradation maps. And here we have so many colleagues that have been together in this session that are working on this. So they will give us, including you, Byron, that there are better data, as you said, that we can use. This is the first approach. This has been draft work. So this is the first time that we are presenting this to the stakeholders precisely to receive your feedback. So we are going to explain to you the 3 layers that we use. The first one is about the world covered of the European Space Agency, the ESA. The second has to do with the tendency of a degraded area. And the third is the footprint, the human footprint index. And we have in this regard national data to be used to replace the current data. If you have a suggestion of new data in green, now here on the right side of the screen, if you have any other source that you would like to suggest about the data that was used. So, Byron,
These are institutional data with regards to coordination. So we will certainly have that contact through Maria Veronica with each of the institutions that are with us today. So rest assured, we're also taking note of that. But maybe, Byron, if you would provide us with your feedback with regards to the different data layers used for the identification of degraded areas, or in any case, if we believe uh, that these may be the most suitable to be used, the most accurate, or if we may be missing on any national data to be used. Maybe, Monica, we can highlight line 3 so that we can show everyone that we are here on trends on degraded areas. From ESA, I believe that we have no comments. Is that correct? The European Space Agency will cover data, so maybe now we will move to the next line of degraded areas, that is trans-Earth degraded areas. It seems that it would be the best area to use. And of course, we will be sharing once again the draft for the dossier draft. And hopefully you will be able to help us include all of the feedback. Excellent. Now, what you mentioned, Byron, should I be including this in the trans-Earth of degraded areas, or would that be part of the world cover? Could you help me with this, Byron? With regards to the last part, the last bit that you mentioned, that would be in trends of Earth degraded areas. Great. Yeah, because these would be mainly about large droughts. So Maria Verónica is making this comment. So the data would be historical climate series available. Maria Verónica, you're noting that down, right? You can turn on your microphone because we only have 25 minutes left this session. Excellent. So Maria Verónica, you don't actually have the option for editing. So please open this spreadsheet so that Fabian may edit it. There we go. Thank you so much, Fabian. So Pablo says, okay, the price for report. Should I include that also in line 4 that has to do with trends and Earth degraded areas? I just wanted to explain a little bit, if I may, as my colleagues have explained from the Undersecretariat of Climate Change. This responds to two conventions, Rio's desertification and climate change. So both conventions have their own methodological framework. With respect to Earth degradation, the price report is the instrument that allows for the Convention on Desertification to measure the progress or advances with regards to this convention, basically measuring the status of degradation of Earth based on 4 indicators: Earth coverage, organic carbon and soil, and productivity. So I wanted to explain this because precisely the layers, the input layers that you have, we could say that differ a little bit. For example, we do not consider for the estimation of degradation of Earth the human footprint index. Also, when it comes to trends of areas degraded or degraded areas, you use Trans-Earth, but we also use national information to estimate those degraded areas. I'm sorry, the audio is breaking. I think it's ideal to be able to discuss the information available and the improvement measures that we are discussing from MATE, that is from the Ministry of Environment. So as I say, it is important for us to discuss this and to be able to agree on methodological aspects. Of course, Pablo, and this is precisely the idea of this first iteration in order to later on address the methodological aspects where we will be withdrawing data from and what we have been working on thus far. Enrique, over to you. Thank you, Cas. With regards to the price report, we understand that these reports are not available to the public. So Pablo, maybe you can help us retrieve this information. That would be great. Thank you. Thank you. Maria Verónica is taking down note to see if she can contact Pablo to keep delving into this. I've also recorded Jacqueline's comment. Maria Verónica, also please note down Sylvia's comment in order to have everything together. We've also we are also reading Fabian. There are certain driver studies on deforestation carried out by Rodrigo Sierra. I think that in coordination with the Ministry of the Environment. So I'm copying Fabian's comment. Maria Verónica, please help us copy Sylvia's comment. So I think that, Monica, maybe we can highlight line 5 with regards to the human footprint index, that this is the entry layer that we have considered. As you can see, the data is here and the detail is here with regards to the data source. If you have any other that we should consider or that may complement this, we are of course open to that. I'm sorry, yes. In the case of information on the different GATS level, this comment would be going to line 4, that is trans earth degraded areas. I think that that was mentioned when we were there working. Land registry, yes, so it should go in line 4. I think there were no further comments with regards to these layers. We're going to now move to the next tab. Please click on the one saying feedback on the priority or restoration priority mapping. I think you've moved forward into mangroves, but please wait. Maria Verónica, please copy Fabian's comment with regards to the layer on mangroves. But let's review together, as long as we have time or time allows, the different layers that we've grouped here to look at layer description, biodiversity, climate change. We're happy to have also the Undersecretariat on Climate Change, human well-being, biodiversity, and we have human diversity once again here. So as of these different layers, I would like to ask, and due to time constraints, we won't be able to delve one by one into them, but please let us know, as Fabian has said, for example, which ones you believe that we could improve or complement better the existing data that we have, data layers. So Fabian, thank you for sharing that. Fabian from TNC Ecuador, the data sources with regards to land cover. Now, if you believe there are other layers we should review or complement, please feel free to drop that or include that on the Excel spreadsheet, sorry. Thank you, Fabian, once again. So mangrove carbon, if you may, Fabian, assist me, is that within the same layer, mangrove layer, or should I look for another line? I believe this should be a new layer, but I'm going to enter. So it's a new cell line that we could be including within the data for the cluster and biodiversity. Please, Fabian, let me know. So for the new line, please make sure if this is all that we should be actually including. This is a discussion for all key stakeholders for reviewing data. But when it comes to climate change topics, thank you, Pablo. He recommends that we include SPRAC So maybe there should be a new layer, right? Pablo, please specify this. Yes, BRAC is actually the platform where we are including different, for example, climate threats, and this has been drafted by the ministry. So this may be included as other comments in a different line because it does not really represent to one of these lines, but rather to the whole climate change package. So, or cluster. So maybe we can add this as a new line in other comments so that the technical scientific team that has conducted this first exercise and as of the key stakeholder session, maybe we can add or look, they can add or look into that. And if necessary, of course, they can reach out to each of the institutions through the wonderful work that Maria Veronica will be conducting and that she has formally done for the ELSA project. Any other comment with regards to the data used? So as you can see, per group on biodiversity, we've received one. That is Pablo dropping the comment for climate change. With regards to human well-being, if there may be any observation, review, please drop your comments in the chat box or also raise your hand.
Si podemos bajar el cursor a mostrar que estamos en todo el grupo de datos de bienestar humano.
And if we can drop or scroll down to see if we have the human well-being data here. So, ecosystem map of DMQ. Can you assist me with that acronym, please, Sylvia? Please feel free to open your microphone and explain where I can actually jot this down. Yes, Cassandra, this has to do with a more local level, more specific level. We worked at the Metropolitan District of Quito, that's DMQ in Spanish, so maybe we could provide you with this information. This is information that was published this year, actually developed by FONAC and the Secretariat of the Environment, and we also have climate information. Okay, so this would be something that could be used by the various layers. So Maria Veronica, maybe we could add this at the end of the table as an extra comment on a local level, maybe on line 34, so as not to really miss it along the chat box. In any case, we will be going through all of the comments in the chat box. Fabian has apologized. He needed to leave to get to another session. Thank you for your engagement. Sylvia, yes, we have noted this down. Joel has said, for the current use of soil and changes in the use of soil, you need to review the data on map biomass, map biome, drafted by Ecoscience or Ecociencia. Yes. Thank you, Joel, for that. I will be including a brief note if I don't actually find the specific name. Perfect. Thank you, Joel, once again for your comment. Updated information also on the National Forest Assessment. That is also a general comment, Maria Veronica, that we may include because it does not specifically fit into one of those lines, but it could tap into several of the lines. As for mangrove, I believe that's a line 4, which you also have the Global Mangrove Watch platform with a lot of information that we can look into. Thank you, Jacqueline, for that. Okay, we can add that. And the same goes, we want to thank Fabian, who has provided the sources for that data when it comes to mangrove coverage for the Mangli project between Ecociencia and CIFEN that would also fit in line 4 for the mangrove layer. Thank you so much for that, Fabian. So I'm not sure if there are any further comments with regards to human well-being, the data layers used there. If these are the most recent, the ones that we would be using with regards to indigenous territories, capacity of land and use, I think that we will get a lot from the National Forest Assessment. Sylvia says for KBAs, that is key biodiversity areas, key areas for biodiversity. That's line 10. We can use a BirdLife International and also for bird conservation. That's line 13. That's the name. Okay, that's the name of the organization. That's Aves y Conservación. Perfect. I thought that we were talking also about the line where it says bird life richness. So that's all good. Anything else? Anything else on human well-being? Is there any comments you'd like to make? Maybe also with regards to the data layers used for Galapagos that Dee mentioned, that we had noted down the questions. But if there were any feedback that you would like to provide, especially if we have experts working in that area, I would just like to make a recommendation. Yes, Sylvia, over to you with regards to the comments, with regards to forest national assessment. There was a map on forest degradation in Ecuador made a few years ago. We should have that input as well. And maybe in the references that you have in that spreadsheet with regards to MATE 2018, is that updated information? Because in 2010, 2013, there was a mapping on deforestation carried out and also the ecosystem map. Maybe that information could come in handy as well. Thank you so much, Sylvia. Maria Veronica is taking note on that to look at the forest degradation map for Ecuador that we could look into to look at that with the data layers. I think that this could be a very good input. That's the forest degradation map of Ecuador. Maria Veronica is jotting it down in the comments in the chat box for us to have that record. I think that with that, we've had a first approach to the data used review. Although we're running short of time, this has been quite a long session. However, we've been able to gather many of your concerns, questions, and inputs in this first round of consultation. We have this perspective of convening all stakeholders since the onset of this work so that we can have later on this one-on-one spaces, continue along this review process and have a next session to show and share with you how this dossier is moving forward to restore Ecuador. So with that, we're going to wrap up our workshop. Thank you so much, everyone, for your active engagement. We will be working to improve and enhance this draft in a process that has started today. and we will continue working together. That said, in the upcoming days, hopefully tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, we will have all of this information packaged together, recordings, the presentations, Excel spreadsheets, dossier in its draft version. We will be submitting everything for you to provide your input and feedback with all of the future timeline, so that this may serve also as important information for you. But before wrapping up, I would like to thank all of the team that has allowed for this workshop to be possible. We wouldn't have been able to conduct this since the support and leadership of the UNDP in-country office. Thank you for all of the, and for the representative in Ecuador. Thank you, Monica Andrade, Andrea Vivar, who has joined us today. I want to thank also Arturo Mora, Alejandro Alfaro, from the Amazonia. There was a lot of interest expressed to go through the Amazon area. Thank you so much to all of you at the Ministry of the Environment who have been collaborating today. The Ministry of the Environment, Water and Ecological Transition, Marilene Schu, Director for International Cooperation, and Mrs. Ibanez, which we've been able to convene you all, also the Undersecretariat of Cultural Heritage, of Climate Change, the National Project for Restoration Landscape, as a secretariat, of course, also with regards to methodology of data within the ministry, with whom we will be coordinating all of the work looking forward. We want to also thank Jason Urban for creating this vision and inspiring us all to explore what could serve for Ecuador to achieve the goals of restoration goals. This, along with the team, Enrique Paniagua, Mónica Mora, Marion Maribo, Verónica Recordos. We need a whole town. It takes a village, but yes, we need a whole city to put up this work. All of the scientific team, thank you so, so much for your presentation, for designing all of the scientific accuracy. And this is, of course, subject to improvement, but this is, again, a pilot stage. Thank you so, so much, Maria Verónica Córdoba, our national consultant. Thank you so, so much to those who will be their direct contact to coordinate with each of the governmental institutions and other institutions that have joined. Thank you so much, Carmelo and Flor, our interpreters today, who are now really in pain because I am rushing as I speak. So lastly, and what's most important is to thank you all once again for your commitment. And may this be the first step to what we believe will be a joint work to review all restoration activities and in our effort to map this and build restoration efforts for Ecuador. This will be something that we will be doing into the month of October. Thank you so, so much. And hooray for Ecuador, beating 2-1 in the match. Let's see how Peru goes. Thank you so much once again, and we'll see each other in our next consultation. Thank you.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Gracias.